Hello, my name is Eva Dausa from the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, and the title of my presentation is Minority Language Families in Diaspora, Catalans in New York City. First, let me start giving you a couple of pointers on the sociolinguistic profile of this population. They are immigrants of opportunity, or fortunate immigrants, expats, whatever you want to call them. They are people trying to improve their lives, but who will stay in the States only as long as it works for them. Upon arrival on the new country, they do not usually seek out a community of compatriots who have already established a minority identity, in contrast with other kinds of immigrants. A reputation, when it comes to individuals, in the form of stereotypes, does not precede them, and they keep tight links to their extended families in the home country, with frequent visits and phone or electronic communication. There is an abundance of mixed marriages, with one spouse being Catalan and the other one not being Catalan. And there's a relative abundance of resources. These people are not poor. They live in Manhattan, after all. And they have high expectations for themselves and for their children. After all, 95 or 96% of them have a university degree, and they are the kind of people who would like their children to speak 5 languages, play 3 instruments, musical instruments, do 3 sports, etc. So, on arrival to the States, they encounter a highly multilingual society that, however, promotes the hegemony of English, and in which Spanish is massively present, as the United States in general, but in New York City in particular. So even though there is a traditional abandonment of mother languages other than English, the spread of an ideology of cosmopolitanism among this population brings the promotion of bilingualism. It is true, though, that bilingualism is especially encouraged in English and Spanish, and other languages that are not English or Spanish are less valuable, with the exception, perhaps, of Mandarin lately because of economic reasons. So, the Catalan presence in the public discourse of the United States, in contrast, is non-existent. It is a little bit more visible in New York City because there's a bunch of institutions and organizations and cultural organizations that make it a little more salient. But 40% of Catalans who transmitted Catalan to the kids say that they speak Spanish outside of home very often, but 20% of them say that they never had the chance to speak Catalan outside of their homes. So why is this population interesting? Because they present an interesting combination of languages potentially available for transmission. They have 2 globalized or international languages, English and Spanish, which have a strong presence in the immediate context, and Catalan, a minoritized language that has been subjected to revitalization campaigns during the formative years of the parents. In many cases also, a 4th language is also present from the other spouse, from the other parent. So the question is, what are the linguistic choices of these parents when it comes to language transmission to their children? Now, this is interesting in the broader context because educating multilingual children is an adventure ideally shared by teachers and parents. In order to encourage families to embark on and persist in the multilingual challenge, teachers benefit from a deep understanding of why parents decide to transmit which of the languages or not, and how they manage to do it or not. So mixed and migrant families offer a particularly interesting case, since typically parents are forced to make conscious choices regarding their language repertoires. They can also illuminate the dynamics concerning societal multilingualism, where choices might be more environmentally mediated. So what are our expectations? By convergence, this situation is likely to either produce monolingual English-speaking children or children who are bilingual in English and Spanish. The odds for the weaker language, Catalan in this case, to be transmitted are low. Especially in trilingual settings, in which each parent contributes one language other than English, Catalan is expected to be the one left behind. So, for our study, we selected people born in Catalonia that grew up under the language revitalization campaigns of the 1980s and 1990s, which at least lived 2 years in the US, with a mean of 8 years having been living in the US, and the children were all American-born. I had a special interest in those who, in ethnographic work as well in a questionnaire, claimed the will to maintain and transmit a minority Catalan identity to some extent. We got information from 70 participants, and this is some of our results. Regarding the level of knowledge of Catalan, Spanish, and English and other languages in the different abilities, understanding, speaking, reading, and writing, in self-report of the parents, we see that this is a highly multilingual population with Spanish acknowledged as their strongest language, followed by Catalan, and then English, and a fourth language in a weaker position, and which is not present in all cases. It's remarkable that parents' schooling in Catalan increases competence in Catalan. A higher level of education causes higher level of English, and competence in Spanish is independent from schooling. This reflects the sociolinguistic situation of Catalan and Spanish back home, with a strong hegemony of the Spanish language and a perennial vulnerability of Catalan as a minoritized language in its own linguistic domain. Now, when it comes to language transmission to the children, we have Catalan, English, and Spanish, and we can see that the chosen language is overwhelmingly Catalan, and this only, if anything, increases with the second and the third child. This is, remember, quite surprising, given the constellation of languages in the family and environment, and even perhaps also a bit surprising considering the relative proficiency. Just a short note about the children. I would like to point out that the children in our study present the usual characteristics to be expected in this population of heritage speakers. Hence, they are located at some point within the bilingual continuum, and in many cases they are cyclic bilinguals. Their linguistic outcomes show the usual phenomenon in multilingual grammars. These are borrowing, calls, interferences, convergences, code switching, and the practicing of translanguaging. Some of these characteristics are due to incomplete acquisition, and some to converged grammars. As for adults, the parents, they oftentimes present language contact phenomena, sometimes referred as linguistic attrition, as to be expected for this population. However, we haven't found any true evidence of dialectal leveling or ethnolex related to Catalan yet, like we have, for example, for Spanish. Now, the conclusion that we reach is that despite of a higher competence in Spanish than in Catalan on the part of the parents, and despite the environmental conditions that would favor Spanish or just English, but not Catalan, there is a higher transmission of Catalan than Spanish to the children within the family. And this is what we would call something like a David and Goliath situation, in which the weakest language somehow survives, sometimes at the cost of the much stronger language. And of course the question is why? Why is Catalan beating the odds and being transmitted? So what we know about minority language maintenance is that there are two factors that are important: the social networks of the family and the language ideologies and attitudes that are held within the group. And we know that these two factors are, of course, related to each other. Now, when it comes with intergenerational transmission, we know that language ideologies and attitudes somehow are even more important than social networks, and that is consistent with our findings, as we will see in a moment. So the first factor that we look at is general attitudes on languages. So we have Catalan, Spanish, and English, and the attitudes, as we can see here, are overwhelmingly positive for all three languages, a little more for Catalan and English than for Spanish. And it's true that in regression analysis, the more favorable attitudes towards Spanish, the lower the transmission of Catalan, and English remains the same. Now, in order to examine the different attitudes attached to each of the languages, we designed a questionnaire taking three groups of attitudes towards each language. We divided some statements about the instrumental values, which are the economic or academic value, and the feasibility of transmitting that language. Another group of attitudes were under the umbrella of integrative values, so feeling part of the community and partaking in their activities. And the third group of attitudes refer to personal values, so the pleasure that one derives from speaking a particular language or having it around oneself, the prestige of the language, or some personal gain to be reached by speaking that language. And these are our results. So as you can see, when it comes to instrumental value, English and Spanish have much higher instrumental value in blue than Catalan. Now, the integrative values in red, you can see that Catalan has a higher integrative value. This is about being part of the community, being part of the extended family, than either Spanish or English, which have a much comparable value. And when it comes to personal values, we can see that Catalan again is the one that has the highest personal value as compared to Spanish and English. So it is clear from our study that Catalan is selected by these families for transmission because of its higher personal and integrative values, while English and Spanish still retain their highest instrumental values. So a first lesson to take home from our study of the Catalan-Spanish immigrants in the United States is that the transmission of heritage language is in some cases a highly charged emotional issue for parents. It contributes to the harmony of the family, and it contributes to the positive development of the children, especially in later years, probably in adolescence. So our conclusion is that heritage language cannot be ignored in school. So when we teach these children, it's a matter of keeping the balance between them acquiring the community language that they're going to need for their daily lives, and also keeping their home language, the home multilingualism, alive. So if our conclusion is that the minority language, Catalan in this case, gets transmitted because of its emotional value higher than the instrumental value, we might ask, well, is that always the case? Is this a typical case of transmission or not? So in order to compare this case with another one which is quite similar, we also conducted a study with Galicians living in New York City. Galicians have in common with the Catalans their native bilingualism and the minoritized nature of their revitalized language. But they differ in the attitudinal profiles towards their minority language in the country of origins, Catalans being much more prone to use their language than Galicians. So in order to select a comparable population, we included questions about the ethnic identification of both populations, and we can see that Galicians in red show similar patterns of identification with ethnic or origin categories as Catalans, which are in green here. If anything, indeed, Galicians identify themselves a bit more as Galicians than Catalans as Catalans, even though this is by far the most chosen category in both groups. When it comes to general attitudes towards multilingualism, we can see that both Catalans and Galicians display favorable attitudes themselves and their spouse towards multilingualism. Now, the big differences come with use. So this is English, this is Galician, and this is Spanish. Galicians declare higher use of both English and Spanish than of their minority language, Galician. And here you have the graph of attitudes and values that Galician parents assign to each of the languages. So you have English here, you have Spanish here, and you have the minority, which in this case is Galician. So regarding attitudes and values, both English and Spanish have higher instrumental value in blue, as in the case of Catalan. Now, Spanish has the highest integrative and personal values in red and yellow respectively, which is a difference with Catalans, for whom Catalan had higher values of this kind than Spanish, and of course English. And this is a significant difference between these two groups. So now for our conclusions. The first one is that English is present in all homes. The second one is that language transmission patterns of Spanish and the minority language, Catalan or Galician, vary. So Catalans are more likely to include Catalan in a significant number of cases at the cost of Spanish. Galicians, on the other hand, are less motivated to include Galician and in no case at the cost of Spanish. The values assigned to the minority language, Catalan or Spanish, vary and are correlated with its transmission likelihood. So the high integrative value of Catalan and its central, almost exclusive symbolic value in the construction of Catalan identity favors or perhaps allows its transmission, despite of Spanish having a higher instrumental value. Now, Galician language has a less monopolizing symbolic value in the construction of Galician identity and less integrative value. As a result, migrant Galicians tend to choose Spanish for transmission based on its higher economic and instrumental value. So when it comes down to education, this is my advice. Schools need to learn about the role that different languages have in the family, in order to help the development of harmonious bilingualism and help the families reach their linguistic goals. Parents have powerful reasons to choose which languages to transmit or not to their children. The teachers can be powerful allies in their common goal of educating these children. Thank you. These are my acknowledgements. Thank you.